Ever feel like something's missing in your faith? Like you're going through the motions, Sunday services, dot nice, but it's not really feeding that deeper longing for something more.
Yeah,
You're so not alone.
not at all.
We hear that a lot. And that's exactly what we're diving into today. Is Sunday service enough?
Okay.
We're turning to a conversation between John Mark Comer, he's the pastor, he wrote The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry,
Ew.
and Carey Nieuwhof, pastor, author, podcasting, Carey.
Yeah, love Carey.
So insightful.
Yeah, and I love that they've both actually walked away from leading megachurches. So they bring like a really unique perspective to this whole conversation about what it even looks like to try to grow spiritually today.
Yeah, they've been there.
Yeah.
They've done that. They've seen behind the curtain.
Exactly.
And Comer, he's so honest. He talks about how he's reached this point where Sunday service just doesn't have the same impact on him that it used to. And like, hold on, before you think, well, yeah, he's a pastor. Of course he feels that way. I think a lot of us can relate.
Oh, for sure.
Even if we don't always admit it out loud. Have you hit that point?
Yeah, totally. And it's like Comer connects that feeling to like the built-in limitations of how we do church, especially in these bigger churches. He says churches have an ego, that polished image, right, and a shadow. Those weaknesses nobody really talks about.
Okay, ego and shadow. Break that down for me a little. What does that even look like when we're talking about a church?
Okay, so the ego of a church could be their amazing worship band, or how put together they are online, even just having tons of people show up every week. It's what they want everyone to see, the highlight reel, basically, right?
Yeah.
But the shadow side, that's all the stuff that gets swept under the rug. The lack of real, genuine relationships, the pressure to look like you have it all together, spiritually speaking. Or the fact that going to a service on Sunday doesn't really equip you for actually living out your faith Monday through Saturday.
Like they've nailed the welcome party, but haven't quite figured out how to get the actual party started.
Yes.
I like that.
And Comer says part of this disconnect is because so many churches are just massive. He talks about Dunbar's number. It's this idea that 150 people is like the maximum number of meaningful relationships our brains can actually handle. More than that. And the whole group dynamic just kind of shifts.
So 150 people, perfect size for dinner party. No, that's insane. Never mind. But you see what I'm saying? It makes sense, though. We're made for connection, but there's got to be a limit, right? How many people can we really be deeply connected with at one time?
Exactly. We weren't designed to have hundreds of best friends.
Right.
And to be fair, there's nothing wrong with a big church, but
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, can they really support the kind of deep, life-changing relationships that are so essential for us to actually grow spiritually?
And especially when so many churches are built on that 1 hour a week, everyone in the auditorium model. It's not exactly like how Jesus did it with his disciples, is it?
Definitely not.
Spending every day together, really doing life shoulder to shoulder.
Right, and Comer even suggests some people might get to a point where they've outgrown the Sunday school answers,
Like they're ready for the deep end, but nobody's offering that.
Oh,
So what happens then? If not just Sunday, then what? How do we break out of that Sunday service box and make space for something more? Well, Comer talks about this thing called spiritual stage theory. And don't worry, it's not like leveling up to become a spiritual superhero or anything. He uses the framework of the critical journey. And it says most churches are really good at the first 3 stages.
recognizing God, accepting the basic stuff about faith, and then, okay, now it's time to actually get involved and serve.
Oh, good. Right. But then Comer says a lot of people, they hit this wall after those initial stages, and the church doesn't always know what to do with that.
It's like finishing Church 101, but then nobody tells you where to go to sign up for Church 201.
Right.
And a lot of times, it's in that in-between space that life throws you a curveball. A huge health scare, maybe your marriage falls apart, maybe your faith just starts to unravel. Something that forces you to face the hard stuff in life.
And that's where Comer says things get really interesting. He noticed that people, instead of using those challenges to go deeper in their faith, they go looking for new religions. Now, he's not talking about like joining a different denomination. He's talking about those belief systems, those things we pour ourselves into that give us that rush of belonging and purpose that we might have once gotten from our faith.
Right, like maybe we get super into politics.
Yeah.
Or work takes over our entire life.
Yeah.
Or we get swept up in a cause. And again, not that any of that is bad necessarily, but it can become like this substitute. Instead of doing the harder work of growing spiritually, when we hit those walls and want that feeling of faith being new again.
Makes me think about that Richard Rohr quote. If we do not transform our pain, we will most assuredly transmit it. So True, right. It's easier to latch onto a new system, a new cause, than to actually deal with our pain, our doubts.
Totally.
And that's where I think Comer's idea of training versus trying in our spiritual lives is so helpful.
Oh, yeah.
He says we approach our faith with this like willpower mindset a lot of times. If we just try harder, be more disciplined, we'll magically become these perfect disciples.
Yeah, if I could just get it together.
Which, let's be real, it's exhausting.
Oh, it's impossible.
There is no way to willpower yourself into spiritual maturity.
No.
It just doesn't work.
And Comer uses the example of training for a marathon. Like, you can't just wake up one day and decide, today's the day I'm going to run 26.2 miles. You have to start small.
Yeah.
You build up your endurance over time. You learn how to get your mind right. You got to listen to your body. It's a process, right?
It's a journey.
And it takes a different kind of commitment than just showing up one day and hoping for the best.
So instead of all that pressure to be this perfect, patient, generous person right now, what if we thought about spiritual growth like a lifelong training plan?
I love that.
You know, we're in it for the long haul.
Yeah, and I think it's a lot more grace-filled.
Oh,
It
yeah.
acknowledges that real change, lasting change, it just takes time. You can't rush it. You can't force it.
Speaking of grace, Comer also talks about the problem of mixed motives. Even as a pastor, he's honest about struggling with this.
Great.
It's like even when we're doing good things, writing a book, serving others, whatever, our motives can get all tangled up with ego, ambition, needing to be affirmed. Have you ever noticed that in yourself?
Oh, absolutely.
Like maybe just a little.
All the time. And the important thing here is that Comer's not trying to make anyone feel bad about it. He actually quotes Freud. What we refuse to acknowledge grows in power.
Oh, wow.
So, like, the more we try to pretend those not-so-holy motives aren't there, the more control they actually have.
Oh, that's so good. It's like trying to ignore a song that's stuck in your head, you know? The more you try not to think about it, the louder it gets.
Totally.
It's the same thing.
It's the same thing.
Yeah.
But when we acknowledge those mixed motives, when we shine a light on them without judgment, we loosen their grip. We make space for God to do something real in us,
Oh, I like that.
to change our hearts, to purify our intentions, to free us from performing for worth or significance.
It's just definitely a process, right?
Oh, yeah,
Letting go of the things we cling to for our identity, for security. It's
for sure.
Comer talks about how some of the most significant growth he experienced came through losing things he thought he needed.
Wow.
His identity as a megachurch pastor, his vision for a picture-perfect life.
It's like that thing, right, where you have to lose yourself to find yourself.
Exactly.
And I think that's where Comer highlighting David Brooks's distinction between resemi virtues and eulogy virtues is so important. As we mature, we realize the things people will remember about us, the qualities that actually matter at the end of the day. They have very little to do with what we've accomplished or the awards we've won.
It's about how we loved people, how we showed up for them.
Yeah.
Not because we had to,
Not for the recognition.
but because it came from a place of love.
Yes.
That's a game changer.
It's huge.
So if it's not about building that impressive resume, then what? How do we actually live this out?
Well, that's where Comer's own life takes this really interesting turn. He decides to step down from leading this megachurch, to pour his energy into his family, his community, his own spiritual growth.
Wow.
Like, he's living out that shift from resume virtues to eulogy virtues, you know?
Yeah, it makes you think. What if we all saw our lives as this ministry, no matter what we do, how many followers we have, whatever? What if we focused on those everyday moments, those chances to show Christ's love and grace to our families, our communities? It's not about having some big platform or anything. It's about those small, consistent acts of love and service.
It's so true. And that reminds me of something Comer says near the end of their conversation that really stuck with me. He says, you must find the goodness of God in your actual life, not in some ideal future, not in chasing achievements, but right here, right now, in the mess of our everyday lives.
So good. It's like this call to be present,
Yes.
to practice gratitude, to find meaning, not just in what we're doing, but who we are.
Exactly.
And that journey, becoming who we're meant to be, that lifelong training plan for our souls that we were talking about, it's going to look different for everyone, right?
Sure.
For some people, it might be the traditional spiritual disciplines, prayer, studying the Bible. For others, maybe it's exploring new practices.
Yeah, like what works for you.
Yeah, finding those things that help you connect with God in your everyday life.
Exactly. And I think the key is it's not a one and done thing. It's something we keep coming back to, you know?
Always learning, always growing.
Always.
I love that. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm left with this question. If our spiritual journeys are a form of training, like Comer says, how do we get intentional about creating that training regimen for our souls, even outside of church, even outside of Sunday? What are the practices, the rhythms, the relationships that'll help us cultivate those eulogy virtues? Things that really matter in the end.
Such a good question.
Something to think about.
Absolutely.
Thanks for diving in with me today.
Thanks for having me.